Hey everyone, welcome to Bald Guy Money. And I have a very special episode for you all today because I am going to be covering the following topics, and you can see those topics here, with special guest Andy Schectman, CEO of Miles Franklin, and we'll be talking about, are we really headed towards de-dollarization and a dollar collapse? Is it too late for the USA and the West to fix the ugly situation that we're in right now? How much gold is the USA and BRICS really holding? Can we trust the official data? Is China manipulating the price of gold to purchase more? And finally, what can the average person, so the person like you watching this video, do to prepare and keep their metals safe? And we're covering these topics in an effort to become the most trusted source of stacking information on YouTube, where ideas are shared, challenged, and discussed. I know it's a long video, but it's worth your time, especially if you are concerned about what is happening on the market right now. Stay tuned to the very end, where I add my 2 cents on the discussion that I had with Andy. And if you're not subscribed, I kindly ask you to subscribe right now. More than half of our viewers are not subscribed, and you will want to stay up to date on what I will be talking about on this channel over the next few months to come as cracks in our system become more apparent. So without any further ado, here is my discussion with Andy Schectman. So here he is, Andy Schectman. Welcome to Bald Guy Money. I was just saying, Andy, how much I respect you for coming on here to speak with me and answer some of the questions that we had discussed, since nobody else in the precious metals business would do it. You're the first.
Oh man, it's an honor to be here. You kidding me? I appreciate it. You know, one of my clients turned me on to you, and I've been watching everything you put out ever since. And I'm a fan. I'm impressed with what you're talking about, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, look, I assume most of my viewers know who you are. You are kind of famous in the gold and silver community, and you've been on a lot of programs lately talking about your prediction, or at least what I kind of interpreted as a threat recognition, that a new reserve currency introduced by the BRICS could trigger a massive dollar dump, thus seriously devaluing the US dollar. So before we get into kind of the hard-hitting questions, would you please give my viewers an overview as to what your thesis is on de-dollarization?
I'll try to be as quick as I can, but this will take a few minutes anyway, at least to lay the foundation. I talk about these mile markers of significance that I've witnessed over the years in my career. And I, you know, one of the things that's freaking me out is that in 33 years that I've been doing this, I will tell you that almost everything we've talked about as a company has in one form or another come true. And it's largely because they're rooted, these ideas we come up, these theses we have are rooted in economics, mathematics, and a sprinkling of old school logic on top of the ideas. But never when we thought. I mean, I've been early as can be. I'm the little boy who cries wolf. I have been for a long time, noting that the wolf does come at the end of the story. Most of what I've talked about over the last 3 decades has come true, but usually months or years, usually after I ever would have thought it would have happened. And let's go back to 2017. And in 2017, we were at the tail end of a 6-year downdraft bear market in gold and silver, when it had gone from its all-time high at $50 silver and $1,915 gold or thereabouts in 2011, and went south, completely south, until 2017. And you know, it was a rough time to own a precious metals company then, because you had Bitcoin accentuating, you had the stock market doing well, and gold and silver languishing. People were selling their metals to buy Bitcoin, and the central banks were selling their gold too, which at the time didn't make sense to me. It does make a little more sense to me now, but let's get into it. So 2017 rolls along after 6 years of a downdraft, and something happens that catches my eye, and the German Bundesbank. There's an article that floats all over the place in 2017. The Bundesbank says, "Hey, we've been trying to get our gold back now for 2 or 3 years. This is getting ridiculous. We want all our gold back." And they were speaking to the New York Fed. We've been holding their gold for I don't know how long, and they said, "Hey, send us back our gold. We want it back." I thought that was interesting because the central banks had been selling their gold. Well, within a few months of that, the Bank of Austria, the Bank of Turkey, the Bank of Poland, the Bank of Hungary, the Czech National Bank, the Dutch National Bank, all of these Eastern European central banks said the same thing, not just to the Federal Reserve, but also to the Bank of England. Give us back our gold. Let's call this repatriation. And this was in 2017 when, no one was buying gold. In fact, the central banks were selling gold, as were a good deal of my clients, good portion of my clients. And something's weird here. 2018 rolls along the following year, and those same banks, central banks, bought more gold as a group than they did in the previous 60 years combined. And so now I'm really watching something. So first the banks repatriate it. Now they're massively accumulating it. And 2019 rolls along the following year, and those numbers are up 90%. And we hit mile marker number one, where the Bank of International Settlements reclassifies gold as a high quality liquid asset, basically a tier one reserve asset, the only other one in the world next to US dollars and US treasuries. And it's the ultimate form of collateral. And it made sense to me at this point. Hey, the central banks just out of nowhere decide to repatriate their gold and then go on a copious buying spree. Oh, and it's just coincidence that the BIS, the central bank in Basel, as part of the Basel III Accord, decides to reclassify gold from a tier 3 asset up to a tier 1. And a tier 3 asset is why the banks have been selling their gold, where only 50% of its value was calculated on the balance sheet. So the young guys that replaced the old gray hairs in the central banking sphere would have said, what do we want this crap for? It's earning nothing but dust. It costs money to store, and it denigrates our balance sheet. We could sell it and buy treasuries. U.S. treasuries make a return, don't have to pay for the storage fees. It makes our balance sheet whole. It won't denigrate our ability to sell bonds or transact international business. Let's get rid of this gold. Until 2017, things started to change. Well, 2020 rolls around, and those numbers continue to grow. And now we see the accentuation of mile marker number two, which had started a few years earlier, very quietly. But by 2020, it was really gaining steam, and that was the Chinese Belt Road and Rail Initiative. And even though you are speaking to your listeners in a way that is informing them in ways that we don't find in traditional media, I would venture to say there are some people out there who have never heard of it. It is the largest infrastructure project in human history, and it is connecting Asia, Africa, South America, and parts of Europe. It's the old Silk Road. And there's about 150 plus countries who have signed up to it, including all 13 OPEC producing countries. And it is not just connection through railways and maritime channels and bridges and roads. It's also connecting digital, speaking, of course, to the need for silver in connecting what is, in essence, north of 60% of human population in this endeavor alone. And when you add all of the other countries onto it, approaching 70 to 75% of human population and 45% of global GDP before industrialization. And you're talking a massive, massive, massive project, of which on these roads and bridges and railways and maritime channels, only military will patrol it and commerce. So it's the Panama Canal on steroids, and very conspicuously missing from this party is the West. The United States has nothing to do with it. The majority of the contracts on this Belt Road and Rail Initiative are settling on the new Chinese digital yuan. So you are indoctrinating 3/4 of human population into a new settlement currency, that being the digital yuan. More on that later. But the moral of the story here is that you are connecting a good swath of human population, and the US is not part of it. So we continue to move on, and we see in 2020, now without getting too deep, the Commitment of Traders report, the COMEX exchange publishes a report every week that shows the positioning of the largest traders. And for all the years I've been watching it, on one end you had the commercial banks, and on the other hand you had what's called the specs, or the speculators, the hedge funds. And it would show the positioning on the COMEX of the largest traders. This is where gold and silver and all the other commodities are traded and issue a global price. And then out of nowhere in 2020, we see the rise of a third group of reportables on this sheet they call the others. Never seen them before. These are believed to be sovereign wealth funds and family offices, the most well-informed and well-financed private investors in the world, who go on a binge of systematically draining the COMEX of physical metal, where in 2020, they bought more silver than was sold in a decade previously, more gold than the Bank of Japan holds in their official holdings. So you're dealing with a group of incredibly sophisticated investors that came out of nowhere that start doing what the central banks have been doing, gobbling up gold and repatriating it, pulling it off of the exchange. So where are these sovereign wealth funds? Could it be they're outside the United States? Absolutely. Are they in the East? Absolutely. We'll get back to that in a moment. But what you take away from that is that on top of the central banks, for the last several years leading up to this, been draining all of the world's gold and silver, physically accumulating it and repatriating it. Now we see the private investor that I would argue is very close to the information. Are they the central bankers wearing different hats, or are they just cued into what's coming? So 2021 rolls around and we see mile marker number 3. And through all of this, we see the central banks continuing to copiously accumulate gold. And mile marker number 3 is the day the United States left Afghanistan. And I know you are originally from Canada, but if you were born in the United States, I'm 52 years old. And in every movie you ever watched, every commercial about military or military enlistment or recruiting, or any television show, anything you saw about military, there was one common theme, and that is no one is ever left behind, ever. And yet that's exactly what we did. We left servicemen and women behind, and equally as bad, the freedom fighters, the Afghani freedom fighters, whom we promised we would take with them, us, and we didn't. And we left them behind enemy lines. We gave their biometrics to the Taliban, and we left in a way that was humiliating, in my opinion. It was a very sad day for this country, and with people hanging from the wings of a transport plane as we picked up and left billions of dollars worth of our equipment there in the hands of the enemy. There's no coincidence to the timing of mile marker number 3. That day, Saudi Arabia announces a joint military cooperation agreement with Russia, and the next day, Nigeria does. Well, you got the biggest and the 4th or 5th or 6th largest OPEC producing countries in the world are now being protected by Russia. And most people don't understand what that means. So let me elaborate real quick. And that is, the dollar at the end of World War II was backed by gold. And it was backed by gold where countries could always exchange their dollars into gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And this was a good deal for all of these countries. They had gold sitting on their balance sheet, earning nothing, collecting dust. And so instead, they would give it to the US, which was the engine of prosperity and freedom and growth. And they would give us their gold, and we would pay them $35 an ounce for it. They would take that $35, go give it back to us, and buy treasuries. So now they're making a return on their gold. And after all, they could always exchange their dollars and get their gold back in any time. And this was a good deal for us. It built our infrastructure by the financing of our treasury market, and they got a return on a non-interest bearing asset. And this was the case until 1971, when many of the countries around the world, in particular, de Gaulle from France, decided to call in their gold and started sending ships back to New York Harbor filled with dollars. And Nixon was left with a dilemma: should I or should I not close the gold window? If I don't, they're going to drain everything. And he did. We went back on our promise. And so in 1971, the dollar was backed by nothing. 3 years later, an agreement was reached between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and by extension, OPEC, that, hey, we got your back. We're going to protect you. Let's call it Joint Military Cooperation Agreement. No one's ever going to mess with you, but for that, you will denominate oil globally in dollars. Okay, they say. So for the past 50 years, the US is protecting Saudi Arabia. And for that privilege, OPEC has denominated oil globally in dollars. And 90% of all oil sales for the last 50 years have been in dollars. It made sense. The world had dollars leading up to this as the world reserve currency. And now, as the petrodollar, everyone's got it. Let's do it. It works. And that is what has created a synthetic demand for the last 5 decades. That is the demand that countries have to have dollars to buy oil, period. Then we decide to weaponize the dollar in 2022. The coup de grace, as far as I'm concerned, the question is, was it intended or was it intended? Are our leaders that moronic to think that it wouldn't have unintended consequences when the world reserve currency administrator says, well, you can use it, but you can't. Now, the rest of the world says, well, look what they did in Iraq. They destroyed that country, never found weapons of mass destruction. Look what they did to Libya. And that's not hypocritical. Yet, you know, what Russia does protecting their own borders against Ukraine. I'm not debating any of this. I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong. I'm just simply saying this is the way the world looks at it, as hypocritical. And yet we can say to them, and it's not our job to say who can and can't use the world reserve currency. That's for world opinion. But you say we can't use your money. In fact, the European Union just confiscated the assets of Russia that they sanctioned to use to rebuild the Ukraine. When you do that, you have created an incentive for all of the world to say goodbye. I need to find a back door, because if we end up on the wrong side of the US, they're going to do it to us too. Do you think there's any coincidence that you're seeing China shed bonds the way that they are, and all of these countries dumping US treasuries the way that we are? So mile marker number 4 would be the weaponizing of the dollar. And, you know, when Klaus Schwab came out and said there'll be a great reset, I thought he was crazy. But think about this. You create an environment where over the last 4 years, more money was created in this country than in the history of the United States before it. You keep interest rates suppressed. Asset prices go to the moon. You see a growing chorus of countries moving against the West, and then you ignite the fuse by weaponizing the dollar and freaking everyone out. Saudi Arabia, what does Saudi Arabia decide to do? Oh, yeah, they're being protected by Russia. That's right. But now they say we have formally applied to the BRICS nations. Holy crap, they applied to the BRICS. And then what did they say in Davos 3-4 weeks ago? We're open to taking other currencies for oil. So here's how the Great Reset happens. And I hope to God I'm wrong. You get Saudi Arabia standing on a stage with Xi Jinping and Putin and the rest of the 13 OPEC producing countries on the Belt Road and says, thanks for the memories, guys. It's been cool. Appreciate it. But now we are joining the rest of our OPEC brothers and sisters on the Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the BRICS. These groups together approach 90% of human population that are not going green. And we are. We are destroying Saudi's way of life by going green. And all of this mass of humanity is not. And they say, thanks for the memories. And they dump dollars because they say, we're taking other currencies now. And I would say to you, when that happens and the dollars come flooding home because you don't need to own dollars any longer to buy oil, and you can use a myriad of other choices. Maybe it's the rupee or the ruble or the petro yuan bond or gold, or maybe it's one of these others that I just mentioned. Bang, the dollar dumps. Flood of them, a tsunami of dollars comes rushing home to the shores of the United States, creating massive inflation, hyperinflation, way more than what Fed Chairman Powell is or isn't doing with this pussyfooting of 50 basis points or 25 basis points, well under the rate of inflation, still creating a negative real return on our treasuries. And that creates hyperinflation. Interest rates go to the moon to compensate for the crashing dollar, and everything in this country that makes people feel rich collapses: stocks, bonds, real estate, and the dollar. It is the Great Reset. So I ask you, before we continue our conversation, is there any coincidence that the central banks of the world bought more gold last year than at any time since 1967, when the dollar was backed by gold, and the second most in history? Is there any coincidence that in the month of January this year, the numbers from December to January for central bank purchases is up almost 200% month over month? Is there any coincidence when a country like Turkey, our ally, who has formally applied to BRICS, bought more gold than anyone in the world last year, and again in January bought more gold than any central bank in the world. You can see this is happening. So what is my thesis? My thesis is that we have squandered the good graces of our foreign creditors and the privilege of being the world reserve currency. The world is tired of it. The weaponizing of the dollar is the question that I have. Was it intended? Did they know that we're too far down the road with a country that is 130 or 40 trillion in debt, a $31 trillion national debt on top of Social Security, which just came out in the 2022 balance sheet, 76 trillion underfunded, 76 trillion. A trillion seconds ago, brother, was 31,688 years ago. And that's on top of Medicare and Medicaid and government military pensions. We're broke. We're insolvent. A country where giving $114 billion to the Ukraine is okay, including giving pensions to their government when there's a $1.75 trillion pension shortfall in this country. We are destroying our credibility, the good graces of our foreign creditors. And you know what? There is no coincidence in my mind. And was it a coincidence or was it intended? Did they realize that we're too far down the road and either they fall on the sword and admit to horrible monetary policy and horrible decisions, or do they blame Xi Jinping, OPEC, Putin, and the rest of the BRICS countries who ruined our way of life, those bastards? How could they do this to us? And point to a culprit of it all. And I don't know the answer to that question. Is it intended? Are they that stupid to think by doing this, there wouldn't be a backlash? All right, I'm going to take a breath now and I'm going to listen to what you have to say. But that is the theory, man. And it's happening. And it's going faster and faster and faster and faster. And more countries are coming together. And I don't know, man. Let's have a discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, look, Andy, I don't believe in coincidences. And I've been saying on the channel for a while, look at what the smart money is doing. So I think it's a fascinating and important thesis. And I really think it's important that people like you are identifying these very real threats in order to properly prepare for them, as much as we could ever count on anybody in government to properly prepare for anything. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, the preparation topic I really want to discuss with you, the first question I want to ask you, Andy, is if the BRICS follow through with this, why should anyone trust the BRICS will successfully and transparently implement a commodity-backed currency? Who will verify it is actually backed up by what they say it is?
If you're going to make it work, I think you have the distributed ledger technology showing the immutability and the veracity of which each country pledged. No question about it. And this is why the central banks like Turkey have gone on a massive buying spree, because they did just apply to BRICS formally. So maybe they have it held in a Swiss vault or in Dubai on the exchange or wherever it may be, and have independent auditors, just like they have independent nuclear auditors go in and validate and verify what's going on in Iran. Why couldn't they do it at a central bank in a vault and say, yep, it's all here, and what I see on the ledger for the whole world to see is here? If you do it right, this is their one shot. If they do it right, they will supplant the US dollar as the sole world reserve currency. As Zoltan Pozsar, the repo market expert from the New York Fed, who's now at Credit Suisse and understands the plumbing of the financial system better than anyone, he says, we have entered a system called Bretton Woods 3, one that is dominated by transparency, not an opaque system, as you mentioned, and commodities, not debt instruments. So if you want to make it work, roll out a new central bank digital currency with the distributed ledger to show the veracity and immutability of what every country pledged, to give them equal footing at the table, and do it right. Find some independent auditors, the big three or whatever you want to do, invite them in once a quarter, and you count everything that's there and say, yeah, it's real, it's here. And if you do that and have a transparent system, one that speaks of mutual beneficial relationships and transparency, it'll work. And so I don't know what their plans are for that, but I will tell you, to me, that would be the genius of rolling out a CBDC, one that is pegged to commodities for the whole world to see. and do it right and let people examine it and show the veracity of it, and it's a home run.
Okay. Could the BRICS, by doing this, trigger a reaction from the West that preempts their efforts to establish an alternative reserve currency? If yes, Andy, I'd like to know what it is you think they could do.
Yeah, so I was asked that question. I did an interview with Michelle McQuarrie from Kitco in Vancouver, and before we started the interview, she said, "Listen, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to push back." I had no idea what she was going to ask me, and she asked me that question, and luckily, I had just read an article that was published by the International Monetary Fund. Remember, they were formulated at Bretton Woods, 150 countries plus from around the world who said, we want a new Bretton Woods. Well, the article that they just published is something to the extent of gold as an international reserve, a barbarous relic no more. So you got the IMF coming out and saying, hey, gold is not a barbarous relic anymore. It's an international reserve. So the US, who has veto power at the IMF, they have like 17% share, whatever it is. How hard would it be for them to roll out preemptively their own gold-backed digital currency through the IMF, which, special drawing rights, if you want to call it that, or whatever it may be, a Western currency pegged to gold showing transparency. Now, right here, you got President Roosevelt, right? And he confiscated, there's the executive order, and he confiscated gold, his first act of office in 1933. Back then, gold was redeemable. President de Gaulle from France proved that redeemable currencies get redeemed. So I don't think it will be redeemable, but I do think they could peg 10% of every new dollar in circulation, every new central bank digital dollar in circulation, same thing, tied to a distributed ledger for everyone to see. The big three auditing companies come in and audit it, and 10% or 15% of every new dollar has gold backing. You cannot redeem it, but it is tethered so that the government cannot print more money in the last 4 years as they did in the history of the country before it, so that they cannot destroy the value of the world reserve currency, as every government has done since the beginning of time. Go back to the Roman times. They have all chosen inflation over austerity. And so that is exactly how they could do it. They would have to do this quick, because I really do believe that the moves that we are making, the idiot, brain dead, moronic monetary policy decisions that we are making is expediting the de-dollarization. But that would be, to me, the only way that it works, short of dropping bombs on all these countries, which God forbid, because now you're dragging Russia and Iran into, Russia and China into this war as well. And I don't think that's going to happen. The best way to win is to beat them at their own game through the IMF, and all of the Western countries that are together issue a gold-backed settlement currency, call it special drawing rights, and peg it to gold. And that's the only way it's going to work, in my opinion.
Now, I'm just going to share my screen with you quickly, because there is something that I wanted to discuss with you. So now, before you came on, we discussed some of the data surrounding this whole situation, specifically the gold reserves that are officially being held by each country. And as you can see, I've put them up on the screen right now. And this data here, I've taken it from Trading Economics, and it shows the top 20 countries in order of largest to smallest gold reserves. Now, looking at this data, it seems to suggest that the Western alliance of countries would do just fine in a situation where commodities like gold would be used to back up currencies. So I'd like to ask you, can we trust this data that we're seeing now? Because there are a lot of theories bouncing around out there, Andy. I'm sure you've heard them before. I mean, you've been deep in this business, knee deep in this business for a long time. There are a lot of theories out there saying that China has way more gold than they have officially declared, and that the United States actually has much less. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's true. Alistair McLeod, one of the smartest guys out there, says he believes that the Chinese would have 38,000 metric tons. And that would be 5 times more than we supposedly have at Fort Knox, which hasn't been audited, I think, since 1956. So, yeah, absolutely. He says that 20,000 metric tons would be owned by the state and 18 by the people. They are the largest importers and producers of gold in the world. And so they haven't, but just a few times in the last, I don't know, decade or longer, updated their central bank gold holdings. And so, yeah, I think those numbers are completely BS. Why would you tell the world what you are doing and be transparent about it if you're the Chinese, if you are trying to set up this type of a system? And it's the same reason that they suppress the price on COMEX, and yet you see the central banks buying more gold than in any time in the last 55 years, the second most in history. It is misdirection. It is The Art of War, the book by Sun Tzu that was written in the 5th century BC, that is mandatory reading at West Point and the CIA. It's taught to almost every Japanese business executive. Bill Belichick, the best football coach of all time, uses it for game theory. You know, it's how to beat your opponent without throwing a punch. It's taught in almost every business school on corporate hierarchy, and most law schools on formulating arguments. It is exactly what they're doing. They are misdirecting by suppressing the paper price and gobbling it up. So just so people understand how they suppress the paper price, we hedge everything that we have. All of our gold that's in our warehouse is hedged. And I asked my head trader the other day, I said, what does it cost to buy a contract, a COMEX contract? He says, I don't know, $5, $10. That's it. He says, but we have to have $7,000 in our margin account. Well, if you have $7,000 in your margin account, that allows you to control right now almost 200,000 worth of gold. So what if you are a central bank working through a sovereign wealth fund, or you are a commercial bank like JP Morgan, who just paid a $920 million fine to the Justice Department a year ago, the largest settlement ever at the time, for suppressing the metals market, while, according to Ted Butler, has amassed 1.2 billion ounces of silver and 12 times what the Hunt brothers tried to buy, and over 45 million ounces of gold. All told, the largest metals position the world has ever seen at one time. They are suppressing the market. If you are a bank like that and have $500 million in your margin account, you can create whatever perception of reality you want. You drive down the paper price, you speak about it negatively, you talk about it being conspiratorial, tinfoil hat wackos and doom and gloomers, and then you watch the most sophisticated people on the planet gobble it up, and they will paper over their short positions. They are misdirecting the public with price and with rhetoric, and the information that they put on that chart is hogwash.
So we've talked about we've touched on a lot of topics so far, but maybe the most important part of this conversation is we are already seeing pressure on banks in the USA and Europe. You are saying that there could be a major de-dollarization event coming. I know we both think people should prepare themselves with gold and silver. That's not a secret. That goes without saying. Now, I have a minimum stacking target for new stackers, a target that I think everybody should strive to achieve, which I've talked about numerous times on the channel. That is 5 ounces of gold and 200 ounces of silver. Considering everything that's going on, I'd like to know, Andy, what target you would give to a new stacker to achieve, and how long do you think someone should give themselves to get there?
I'd work backwards from that, and I would say, what exposure, if you're in the United States, do you want to a system that is $130 or $40 trillion in debt, where the largest asset in this country is student debt? Where a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. Where we are broke, insolvent, making ridiculous, stupid decisions to destabilize and destroy the economy, the banking system, and alienate our creditors from around the globe. And I'd work backwards from there. It's whatever you can afford to do. Look, when I started in this industry, just so you understand where I'm coming from, I was 20 years old, basically, 1990. And I started this company with my dad. After he started it 6 months earlier, I came on board and he said, there'll be one rule and only one rule, Andy. And if you don't do it, I'll fire you. And if not, you're cool. I said, well, I can deal with one rule. What's that? He says, you'll buy something every 2 weeks. You won't make the same mistakes I made as a young man. I said, well, if that's the only rule, I'm good. I've been buying gold and silver every 2 weeks for 33 years, and I've never missed a 2 week period. To me, it is wealth, period. It's wealth. It's wealth that has outlived every world war, two of them, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, and everything the world has ever thrown at it. So a minimum target, I would say whatever you can afford to do, and that you want out of the system, it's wealth.
Let's switch gears to people who are more seasoned stackers and who have a lot more gold specifically, because we have a lot of them here that watch this channel, and I do a viewer question every video. And since you're here, I want to give you the question, and it comes from somebody from my Patreon, and I will put the link to my Patreon in the description and the pinned comment of this video. But for more seasoned stackers, what do you think makes somebody consider vaulting some of their gold? Because I know that Miles Franklin, which is your company, you guys deal in vaulting. And before I let you answer, let me just address the fact that I know this is a very controversial topic for a lot of my viewers. And for those of you who are watching right now who feel safer with your gold in your house, I want to encourage you to do that. Keep it there. But there are those among us who don't feel comfortable keeping more than 100 ounces in the house. They see it as risk. I mean, when there's a weapon to your head, Andy, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that secrets of where you've hidden things start to come out. So is there a specific amount that once you've reached, you think should be vaulted, or at least part of it? And somebody, for example, if they choose to vault gold with you, is any of that covered by insurance should something happen to you or to your vaults?
Yeah, so first of all, it's a fair question. First of all, there are people out there who say if you don't hold it, you don't own it. I own one of the largest metals companies in North America. I can't hold all of mine because of what you just said. I'm a target. That's why I left Minnesota when they led the defund the police movement. That's why I moved to a gated community with armed guards, and that's why I have a concealed permit, and I have taken precautions. And a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people don't want to have that hanging over them. I get it. I'd rather see people dig a hole in the backyard. I make money on storage. Dig a hole in the backyard and be a midnight gardener. I mean, I think counterparty risk is going to take on a whole new meaning when you see all of the systemic failures in the system coming up. But I will tell you that this is why I partnered with BRICS. It's a third-party facility. I'm not holding anything. It's held by BRICS. They are a Fortune 100 company, one of the biggest, most respected names in security for over 100 years. Everything is segregated 100%. It is fully insured. And in a world of imperfect choices, this is where I hold 98% of everything I own is BRICS facilities throughout North America. We have
Andy,
vaults.
let me just cut in there, because you said it is fully insured, right?
Yes.
Because there are a lot of people who watch my videos who get the impression that no, you can't insure gold, you can't insure things if they're vaulted. So I just want to make sure that those people who are saying that, they're basically feeding BS. And the fact is, when we're talking about facts, that it is insured, right?
100%. And
there you go.
We give out the insurance policy rider if people want to see it. It's Lloyd's of London, amongst others.
The best insured.
Yes, and BRICS has massive insurance because they're not just involved in storing gold. That's a minuscule part of their business. They run cash logistics. They'll go to every McDonald's in Toronto and take all of their cash that they got, or wherever. I'm just using a city, throwing it out there, and they'll grab the cash, they'll bring it back, and they'll count it all. And before McDonald's opens up in the morning, that money's in their bank account, and then they'll take that cash and bring it to the bank and deposit it, and they'll get it back. They front them the cash, in essence. But the bottom line is they run cash logistics for the banks and the retail operations everywhere. Gold is just a little piece of what they do, their storage, but it is 100% fully insured. Every major storage facility is. If you store it in little dinky third-party, storage places like in a strip mall, maybe not. In a safe deposit box, absolutely not. But in a place, in a bank, that is. But in a place like BRICS, it is 100% fully segregated and fully insured. In a world of imperfect choices, it's as good as it's going to get. But yeah, holding it yourself. Look, gold and silver are two of the only assets in the world that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. And by holding it yourself, I would say you have a greater chance of being ripped off by the system than by a burglar toting a weapon. But it's real, it's reality. If you have to store it, work with a storage facility that is very respected and that is completely segregated and fully insured. And don't cut corners on storage if that's the way you have to go. Again, in the world of imperfect choices, I think we've done a good job dotting our I's and crossing our T's with BRICS and the services that they provide. I'm comfortable enough storing the majority of my wealth there and all my clients. But truth be told, yeah, I'd rather dig a hole in the backyard. If I didn't own a metals company, I'd probably hold the majority of it because no one would know that I own it. Now everyone assumes I do. And it's different for me than it is for someone else. So do it if you lose sleep at night. If not, be your own custodian, be your own vault.
I like that message. I like that message a lot. Our time is coming to an end. And I want to say that this conversation has been absolutely great, Andy. I really appreciate you coming on. Before we sign off, is there anything you want to say about your company, Miles Franklin?
Yeah, we've been doing this since 1989. We've done over 8 billion in sales. We've never had a customer complaint. We're one of only ever. We won't find one. I'm sure we've aggravated some people. We try our best to make it right, but nothing material ever. We are one of only 24 US Mint authorized resellers in the world, an honor I'm very proud of. We have, as I mentioned, worldwide exclusives with BRICS and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. But the state of Minnesota, my old home state, they don't care. As I mentioned, we've had a satellite office here for 12 years in Delray Beach, where I moved to. But I left my corporate entity in Minneapolis because it is the only state in America that doesn't care about how good your reputation is. If you sell precious metals either in the state or into the state, you must be licensed, bonded, and background checked. Every year, everyone in my company, myself included, must be background checked. And if any of us have any indiscretions related to financial services, you're forever disqualified from being in the industry. So we want to earn people's business. Now, I've been very public about the fact that since last August, I've been humiliated. And that is our new website, which I told everyone would be out by September. It's still not completely finished. We've had to change developers in midstream. We've had to fire people that I consider close friends that I am sick over. We've had to do a lot of things that made me have egg on my face because we didn't finish it yet. It is this close to being launched. I'm not doing it until it's done this time, and it will be out soon, which will allow people to see prices and to purchase online, but we will never be undersold. Our prices are as good or better than every company in the United States, and give us a chance.
Thank you so much for coming on, Andy. And just before we sign off, I do want to say to everybody watching this video, buy the seller before you buy their gold and silver. And this is a great example why what Andy's just spoken about. Thank you again, Andy, for coming on the show. And we will hopefully see you back on the show soon, maybe when you get that website up.
Yeah, I'm always just an email away or a text away or whatever. I'd love that. And until then, I'll be watching everything you do, and I will look forward to picking up where we left off. But to you and everyone else out there, stay well, and thanks again.
Thanks, Andy. See you next time.
You got it, brother.
I really hope you enjoyed that discussion with Andy. I tried to give him some space to explain the situation as he sees it today. And now, just before I sign off, I want to cover the topics where Andy and I fully agree and where we might have a little bit of a different point of view. So overall, I want to start by saying I really appreciate Andy and his way of thinking because he is the first person I saw talking about this in the mainstream. And I agree that BRICS have to mount a challenge to the US dollar and the power the West derives from the US dollar. And the reason for that is what Andy discussed in our discussion, specifically cases like Iran and Russia, countries whose economies have been critically damaged by the powerful weaponization of the US dollar. And I think the BRICS are choosing to accelerate this plan of theirs right now because the US government is showing weakness, and Andy and I agree on that 100%. The Western financial system once again is showing cracks, and we both agree the best way to protect yourself is with gold and silver in your possession. But my message obviously includes a couple more asset classes, namely real estate and Bitcoin. And hopefully next time I have Andy on the show, we will be able to get into those two topics a bit deeper. Andy and I also agree that national gold reserve data is not to be trusted 100%, and that a proper audit of American gold reserves, the kind that Ron Paul had advocated for, are necessary to put doubts to rest. Where Andy and I see things differently is with Saudi Arabia's role in all of this, because I don't think Saudi Arabia truly intends to go over to the BRICS side of this conflict. My assertion is that Saudis do not like Joe Biden or his administration. They do not like his woke diplomacy, and at the end of the day, for better or worse, they want to deal with Donald Trump again, and they are humiliating the Biden administration on a global stage in an effort to destroy the credibility of the Biden administration and ensure that they will not have another 4 years in the White House. No matter where you stand on all of this, recent events have shown us that gold and silver stackers have it right. We've always had it right, and we will continue to get it right as we continue to add to our gold and silver stacks and keep them in our possession. With that, I thank you all for watching to the end of the video. Have a wonderful day ahead, and see you in the next one.